What are you talking about? Hopefully.
You're right. I told you. Dude, it's weird.
I need to listen for your name. If you're one of these people, you're speaking to Mr. King, who's up there waiting for us. Oh, I need Faith, Jude, Caroline M, Sarah S, Spencer M, Brianna M, Joseph L, Tia, Matthew E, Lucy L, Eric T, Nathan W, Steve T, and Rick T.
This points.
Caroline M. Yes. Brianna M. Right there. You're right there. Yes, is that she's probably She's probably what? That's not her. Oh, you're right there. Okay. Joe. Joseph. Where's Joe? Yeah, you're here, bud.
Joe.
It's on the shelf. Thank you, sir.
Nathan W. Kate B. Kate B. I have no idea. Kate. Are you sure it's not? And Grant. Can you read the question? It's about the rat race. It's about the rat race. Who asked the question from my class about rat race? Who wants to talk to Miss Pink? Yeah, let's go right there. Right. She's not here. One cake, please. I want the cake. It says cake. Is she here? Yeah, but she's like, that's not her one. I took it. What do you want to take? You want to have we talked to Dan?
I say, oh, I'm not ready yet. Hold on. You want to watch it? Oh, no, it's fine. You're totally not.
What is it?
See everything.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, rock and roll, great. It took me a while to get it to work.
Well, hopefully this works better than Skype last year. So,
Yeah.
so thank you so much for joining us again. You can see the pan of students that go that way and more that way, and we always like your visuals, you know. So make sure you're accenting with your hands.
Okay.
So we have a number of kids lined up to speak with you, and then. Yeah, at the end, we would love, as always, you know that our final for these kids is their TED Talk, having to deliver their own, and I know that they would probably, knowing that their TED Talk is less than 2 weeks out, and you've given one, and they've watched it, to appreciate some advice from you on their own TED Talk.
Sounds good.
Okay, so Faith is up first.
Okay, well, hold on. Just
Yes.
give me 30 seconds. I got to do one more thing.
No worries.
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Okay, here we go.
And look, hey, you guys, when you're talking to him, look here, not there. Because if you look there, you look like that. It's so weird. Yes.
Okay, I'm ready now. Sorry.
All right. Hi, my name's Faith, and I just want to thank you for talking with us today. So, my question is, did you decide to write this book and then begin to research for it, or did your ideas develop over time and were just translated into text?
That's a good question. What's your guess?
Well, I think you had the idea for it, but then you had to do a lot of research for it.
Yeah, it's a mix of both, actually. Because before you write a book, you do some at least before you write a book, you do some research just to find out whether it's a viable idea. So I had a hunch, and this is really interesting. I did some research on it, and then I wrote what's called a book proposal. It's about a 30-page document that lays out what the book is about, who might be interested in reading it, where it fits into the marketplace. So I had to do a fair amount of research for that. And for me, just personally, I tend to do a lot of research for my book proposals. My book proposals tend to be longer than usual, longer than the typical one, because I do a lot of research for that just to find out whether it's a viable idea. And the reason that's important is that a lot of ideas are not viable, and you want to find that out before you commit to writing the book. So there was a time when I actually sent my family away for about a week and a half in December in order to write a book proposal for this awesome idea that I had. And after a week and a half of writing the proposal and doing the research, I realized the idea was awful. And so I just basically threw it aside. And that's a pain, but I'd rather find it out at that point rather than at another point.
Okay. And I have another question. I want to know how long it took you to research this and what resources you had to access to get the information.
Well, I mean, each book varies. You're talking about the drive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long it took me? Yeah, I mean, it probably took about a year to do the research, and the research was a mix. There were basically sort of two big tent poles for the research on this particular book. One of them was the scholarship, the academic research on motivation. What does the social science really tell us? And that involved reading just a huge number of articles in academic journals, going to the footnotes of those articles, finding new articles, and so forth. And the other tentpole were interviews. So here's a company that's doing something really cool. Here's a school that's doing something really cool. Let me go find one of the top researchers here and tell his or her story. So those were the two main things. But what you find out is that it's a little bit messier than we tend to think when you're doing, say, a school assignment. And that what happens is that you do some research. It's not as if you do the research and then you start writing. What happens is you do some research and then you start writing, and then you realize all of the more research that you need to do. So you go back and do more research, and that informs your writing, and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit less it's a little bit less segmented, a little bit less linear. It's a more of a big stew pot.
Okay, thank you.
First off, I'd also like to just thank you for coming in. Just a reminder, we are talking about a whole new mind, not drive. Well, both, apparently, okay. So my question to you is, out of all the topics or chapters in your book, which one was the most challenging to write and why?
And this is a whole new mind we're talking about. Okay. Most challenging. I would say the last one on meaning, because that's a subject that's hard to write about without sounding kind of woo-woo. You know what I mean? It's sort of an ethereal sort of topic, and to write about it in a way that's compelling, but not kind of doesn't make people go, oh, this is just complete like blah 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 blah. Was kind of challenging. So looking for that's one reason why I linked it into Viktor Frankl stuff, because that's something that I thought was really solid and interesting. One reason that I went to a hospital in that chapter to talk about that kind of thing. So I think that was the toughest one. But they're all tough. They're just tough basically they're all tough. They're just tough in different ways.
Okay, and kind of just a follow-up question: which one do you think has the most meaning? Well, other than meaning.
What do you mean by meaning?
Like, which one do you think will have has the greatest impact on just society in general?
Well, I mean, thank you for even suggesting that it might have an impact on society in general. So, we could spend the next 5 minutes debating that. But I think of all of them, I actually think it's I think it's the very beginning of the book where you lay out the ideas. And that basically determines whether people are going to turn the page to the subsequent chapters. And that very beginning of the book, lays out the big idea. And the truth is that with any kind of book, people aren't going to remember what was in chapter 4 or what was in chapter 7. They might remember. I hope that they remember sort of what it was about in general, and then maybe one thing that they can do differently in their own lives. And that's going to vary significantly with people.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Caroline, and I was wondering. Oh, sorry. Hi. I was wondering, do you think society has successfully become more suited to right-brain thinking since you wrote this in 2005?
Is that a UVA sweatshirt?
Yeah, it is.
All right, that's cool. You interested in going to UVA?
I don't know. I like the campus.
It's a nice campus, isn't it? Yeah. Mr. Jefferson's campus.
Yeah.
I've totally forgotten the question. No, I know it. No, yeah, I don't know. Has society become a little bit more right-brained since then? Probably a little bit. I don't. Again, there's a challenge of whether there's an open question of whether this book had anything to do with it. So. But yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what you see out there right now are, if you look at business schools, there are a lot more business schools, MBA programs, doing programs with people in design. There are a lot of medical schools now doing both story-based and art-based training for doctors. So you see that kind of movement there as well. You actually have a decent number of people going to art and design schools. You have Silicon Valley executives saying that when they look for talent, one of the first places they go is Cal Arts, an art school. So I think in that dimension, there's a lot going on, sort of moving. But I think it's pretty slow. I think on the bigger idea, I do think there's a slow recognition that, as individuals, as an economy, as a nation, that it's hard to sustain an edge relying only on SAP and spreadsheet skills. But again, I think the change has been modest, not massive, and I think there's still a lot of, especially in education policy, a lot of headwinds going in the other direction.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Hi, my name is Sarah. So my question is kind of long. So okay. So in the chapter on story, you brought up the tale of like the hero and how it's like the underlying part in every story, and like even how you realize that it's like the underlying tale in a whole new mind. So I was wondering, in like writing this book, did you kind of go through one of those like transformations, coming from someone who's not quite so sure about the brain and coming out knowing much more about our intrinsic motivations and being able to use that motivations to form a successful future?
Good question. No, that's a great question, and I've actually never thought about it that way. There's probably some truth to that. And I think what I like about the hero's journey is that what I like about the hero's journey, and I think you make a really good point, is that I think you're a good example of it, is that its underlying structure is something we can see in a lot of different places, including in our own lives. I truly have never thought about sort of the process of writing a book or that book as a hero's journey, but there are certainly elements of it that connect really nicely. I mean, let me throw it back to you. Would you say that sort of the march through high school is itself a hero's journey? Can you see elements of those components of a hero's journey in your progress from, say, freshman to senior? What are you right now? A sophomore?
I'm a freshman.
2 weeks from
Do you see the potential for your journey through high school being a hero's journey?
Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. So.
You sound so totally unconvinced by that.
No, I can see that. But I was just wondering, in like writing a book, do you go through like a process though? Like, does it like change the way you like? Does your perspective of your topic change?
Oh, that's a really great question. Absolutely. That's a really, really important point. And so one of the things that happens is that you go in with a strategy, you go in with sort of a plan. As soon as you start doing it, you realize that your strategy and your plan isn't nearly as good as you think it is. And so then you have a choice. Do you stick with your strategy and plan just because of your strategy and plan, or do you change and improvise? And I think you have to change and improvise. And so in this book, for instance, I wasn't sure what the 6 senses were going to be when I started writing it. I wasn't sure there were going to be 6. I knew that there were going to be some things that we had to do, but it took me a while in the process of doing that to figure out. And one of the things that I learned, I'll tell you something I learned in college, which is really useful to me, and I wish I would have known it when I was in, a freshman in high school, was this, is that we have this notion that writing is, you basically figure out what you're going to say, and then you write it, right? So what's my thesis statement? What are my supporting paragraphs? Outline it, and then start writing it. And I think what happens when you get to a different level of writing is that doesn't work very well, and that there's certain topics that are so complex that you have to, and this is what I learned in college. I had a professor who said, it's okay that you don't have this all figured out right now. Sometimes you have to write to figure it out. Sometimes you have to write to figure it out. And so in the process of writing it, you sometimes figure out what you think. And that's a little bit, that's a little bit different from what we learned in high school, that you have an outline, you follow the outline, you figure out what you think, and then you say it. And what I have found is that in many cases, that the act of writing itself helps you figure out what you're trying to say. And that's a big part of writing a book. It's a big part of doing anything.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, my name's Spencer, and my question is about your chapter on empathy. Do you think that technology and computers will ever be able to display emotion like humans?
It's a really interesting question. No, it's a really, really interesting question, Spencer, and there's a lot of work in that area right now. So, for instance, and it goes back to I don't know, maybe it was Caroline's question about what has changed since I wrote the book. But right now there's actually a lot of work and actually a fair amount of progress in having computers recognize facial expressions. And in a whole new mind, I talk about facial expressions and how to read facial expressions. And basically, my point then was that it's really, really difficult for computers to read facial expressions. It's very, it was somewhat difficult for computers to figure out, to basically detect that your face is in Caroline's face, okay? Which any of us could do in an instant. So computers had a hard time doing that. They're actually getting a lot better at that now. And the next step is, can they figure out, can they look at you? Can these computers look at you and say, Spencer is sad, Spencer is happy, Spencer is angry, Spencer is surprised? And there's actually a little bit of progress on that. And it's, yeah, there's a little bit of progress on that. And I think the question, though, is, I think the interesting question, though, is that computer, is that non-human object genuinely feeling emotion? And what do you think about that? That if I have a camera and a computer that can detect that you're feeling scared, and the computer then says, Spencer, don't worry, it's going to be all right. Is that computer experiencing emotion?
It's a little weird, but I don't think it's some experiences it. It just recognizes it.
It's very weird. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it's weird. But I agree with you, and and what's interesting about that, if you see people interact with robots and things like that, is that they end up interacting with robots that aren't human beings, but they end up interacting with them as if they are human beings. And this is, I think, going to become more and more important. You look at a place like Japan. Japan has a very, very significant aging population. So what they have is they have a lot of their demographics that they're going to have. They already have, but it's going to get even worse. A huge amount of older people, but not many people. Not enough people to take care of them. So the Japanese companies are building robots to take care of elderly people. And so, the question is, what's that going to look like? And another great example, have you guys seen the movie Her?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's rated R.
I don't know if you've heard that, but tell me.
All right. Well, if it's rated R, just ask your teacher to take you for a school field trip. But if you look at that movie, it's really about a guy who falls in. It's basically about a guy. You know, talk about the ultimate emotion. It's about a guy who essentially falls in love with Siri on his iPhone. And you know, so is that guy? So back to your word, Spencer. Yes, that's weird. But is that, you know, is he experiencing genuine emotion? And he probably is. Is the computer experiencing genuine emotion? I don't know. And so it's a great question. This is the kind of question that's not going to go away. This is the kind of question you guys are going to be dealing with a lot. So it's a great point. It's a very, very rich area.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Brianna. So my question was about your empathy chapter. You said that empathy comes naturally, and I just don't agree with that. So why do you feel that way?
You don't agree with that. Tell me why you don't agree with that.
I feel like you have to work to especially if it's someone who you don't have anything in common with, or I don't know. I just feel like empathy, you have to try. You can't always just know what someone else is feeling and feel that too.
Right. Okay. I think it's a good point, and Brianna, I empathize with where you're coming from. Okay. But there are different gradations of it. Let's think about it that way. That I think that the ability to experience empathy is fundamentally human. It's basically impossible for our species to survive if we didn't have some capacity for empathy, and it's absolutely innate. Now, that's one point. The second point, though, does that mean that we can experience empathy for every single person, that we do or can experience empathy for every single person in every single situation in our lives? And there, I think you're absolutely right. The answer is no way. And it's and so it's something that we can improve with effort. And what you also have is that people have different innate capacities for it. So you have some people who, based on their biology, their physiology, their brain chemistry, are going to be pretty empathic no matter what happens. You're going to have some people who are going to be less empathic no matter what happens. And so that's pretty much fixed. But what you can do is you can learn ways to move to the upper end of your range. And so it's a mix. I think that human beings have an innate capacity to experiencing empathy, but that doesn't mean that we have empathy for every person, every time, in every situation. Not at all. Not even close. And you make a very, very good point about that we're more likely to experience empathy with people who are like us. There's a lot of evidence of that. And I think that's something that, because we have, as human beings, we have free will, we have to make sure that we actually work against that. So we don't have empathy only for people who look like us or sound like us, but we have to make that extra effort to have empathy for people who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, who don't act like us. And that's an effort. And that's, I think that's one of the most important things that one can learn as a human being, is the capacity to demonstrate empathy for people who aren't. So it's another great point. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Pink. I'm Joseph. And
what's on your shirt, Joseph? I didn't see.
Oh, it's Mr. Rogers. You know? I mean, why not?
Absolutely. Well, that guy had empathy for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So my question is, if you were to add a seventh sense to your list of the six senses, what would it be and why?
It's another really good question. I'm not sure. I'll tell you one that didn't make the cut that I thought was going to make the cut. Because what I started with was a sort of a giant list of possibilities on a whiteboard, a giant list of possibilities and then I would go through and I would talk to people and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? I found that some of them kind of came together. That's how symphony came together. Symphony ended up being an amalgam of a bunch of different things that weren't quite strong enough to stand on their own, but when you put them together, they were actually pretty solid. But I'll tell you one that I was convinced was going to make it there, but didn't make it. And that was touch. Touch. Like touch.
Like an access touch, or like
what?
What do you mean by touch? Like
that was part of the problem. I didn't know what I meant by touch.
Oh yeah.
But I was convinced that the ability to like physical touch was so hard to outsource and so hard to automate that it would be something that would endure as something that's meaningful. Sort of the use of the hands and so forth. And I just couldn't quite pull it off. And so when I talk to like businesses saying, well, what about design thinking as a capability? They say, oh my God, absolutely. What about empathy as a capability? Oh man, absolutely. What about sort of big picture thinking a la symphony? Absolutely. And I said, what about touch? And they would say, what? Yeah, touch, like the ability to physically touch. It's like we don't generally endorse people touching each other all the time. And so I finally realized like I was kind of going down a false lead there. What I was thinking of was some kind of way of I didn't nail it, just some kind of way of physical presence. That is the ability to be there physically as a skill, but I couldn't pull it off, and it didn't really hang together. So it might be sprinkled throughout some of the other ones. After reading the book, do you have an idea?
I don't really have an idea, but I mean, if you could have integrated touch, like, as another sense, that could have worked, but.
Now you tell me.
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's it goes to some of the other earlier questions about, you sort of have ideas and, can you realize them? And sometimes you can't. So that's where it was. But thanks, it's a great question.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tia. My question for you is, how has writing this book changed like your perspective of the world, and like since you published the book, would any of like your opinions that you wrote down, have they changed?
Okay, so those are two really good questions. I think the first one is, I think it totally changed my view of the world. I mean, not necessarily like, I think I see the world entirely differently. So if you look at something like, something even as specific and mundane as taking a drawing course, taking that drawing course fundamentally changed how I see the world. And I say that, I don't say that metaphorically, I say that literally. I see the world differently. I have a window right there. That's the window out of my office right there. Okay? I can even show it to you. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I look out the window there, and so as I look out the window, to my office, what I see is that there is some of it is in light and some of it is in shadow. Some of the yard out there is in light, some of it's in shadow. And I don't think that I would have noticed that had I not taken the drawing course. Because I was completely ignorant in visual thinking. And so that's an example of how something literally changed the way that I see. So I think it had a big effect. I think it had a big effect. It had a big effect that way. I guess I also became much more obsessed over design and recognizing that everything here in our midst is a design, is a product of a design decision. So the configuration of your classroom right there, or where you are right now, the room that you're in right now, there's a design decision there. Someone made a design decision there. Where the lights went in, there's a design decision there. Whether you guys are sitting in rows, sort of in that theater style as you are now, there's a design decision there. And so that was a big change in how I approach the world. The second question is, what would I have done differently, or what have I learned since then? Or
like since you published it.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge amount that I've learned since then. One of them is what I didn't take into account enough was it goes to sort of Spencer's question too, the possibility of robotics replacing other kinds of things. I was really focused on software and its ability to do brain work. And I guess I wish I would have more fully accounted for the ability of robotics to do certain kinds of things, whether it's mundane things like caregiving, whether it's certain kinds of things like customer service, whether it is even more sophisticated things like the capacity, perhaps at some point, that robots could actually do something like very, very simple surgery. So you think about surgery done on autopilot, which sounds a little horrifying right now. But we're entering, we're getting to this world, think about the world of driverless cars. Chances are, I think there's a very good chance that all of you in this room, when you have children, you will not need to teach your children how to drive. That's my prediction. When you have children, you will not need to teach your children how to drive any more than my parents had to treat me how to find tracks through woods in order to get home, right? Because it was an outdated kind of skill. And so you look at something like driverless cars, that's a big deal, change in our lives. And then you go to the next stage, you look about airplanes. One thing that people don't realize with airplanes is that the pilots sitting in the front of the airplane, their job basically is to watch the computer that's flying the plane. All right? You basically have driverless airplanes right now with a little bit of human intervention. So let's take those two things and let's move it forward in other kinds of things. One can imagine something like surgeonless surgery, right? Which is a little bit horrifying, but a little terrifying right now, but it could be the world where it's going. So I wish I had written more and understood more about the capacity of robots to do things that require both physical acuity and human judgment. And I was really obsessed over software.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Matthew, and I have also another question for you. As far as education, how do you recommend that we revolutionize the learning experience at school?
Okay, so I'm going to turn that question back to you, Matthew, so you can think about that for a moment. You don't need to pay attention to my response because I want a good answer from you. All right. So I think it's a bunch of different things, and one of the things that I think we need to do more of is experiment. Try different things and see what works. So you guys have done, your teachers have done just a masterful job of experimenting with things, saying, let's read a book and let's find out whether Cory Doctorow will come and talk to us via Skype or via Google Hangout. That's totally cool. What a great idea. All right? Things like having you summarize your learning in a TED Talk. I think that's a brilliant idea as well. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to have room for teachers to make small experiments. That's a really, really big, important thing. Other ideas are this. Again, not in order of importance, just like stuff we should try. So one of them is more things that are multidisciplinary. Right now, tell me what your courses are right now, Matthew.
Math, then I go English, social studies, I have drawing, and then I have science. Okay,
so that's perfect. So math, English, social studies, science, and drawing. Now, it's very, very segmented, right? And the world is not that segmented. So when you face a challenge later in your life, it's not going to come at you as a math problem. It's not going to come at you as a science problem or an English problem. It's going to come at you as a big honking problem. And so what to me the idea would be a lot more multidisciplinary stuff. So something like, why not have a course where you do you could do an amazing course with math and social studies together. Have the math teacher and the social studies, put those two things together. That would be something that would give you, I think, a lot of insight. So more kind of cross-disciplinary stuff. So allow teachers more room to experiment, more multidisciplinary things. I think that you guys should be getting much, kind of like what you're doing here, much more real life problems. So instead of like a sort of a packaged problem, get a real life problem in your community and try to solve that, rather than say a word problem in math that is about trains moving in different directions in cities you've never been to. And then, so I think that's super important. Sort of breaking down the barriers between school and the outside world, which is what you're doing here. Think about an English assignment. A lot of times in English assignments, you say, what was the author thinking when she wrote blah, 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 blah? Well, what are you guys doing here? Say, why should I imagine what the author is thinking? Let me just ask the author. All right? That's awesome. That's how you actually learn stuff. And then the final one is that I would integrate arts more fully into the curriculum. So that yeah, I think you can learn a lot, for instance, in drawing. I think you can learn a lot in visual arts, in the musical arts, in theatrical arts. To me, one of the skills that you're going to need more than anything else is the ability to compose, the ability of composition. So when you do a TED Talk that you're going to do later on, that's an act of composition in the way that a painting is composed or a musical is composed. When you go do, let's say you want to start a company and you want to do a business plan, that's an act of composition. And so I would integrate the arts more fully on all of those. So those are just two ideas from me. What do you think, Matthew? What's your idea? Just give me one idea.
Okay, well, I agree with you on the hands-on experience, but I think connections are more important. Like connections, well, it's sort of like the hands-on experience, but it's like branching out and like for instance, working, as you said, with authors, or like if you wanted to go into law, like having lawyers come in and like teach you, like just making connections in the world.
I think that's great. I mean, I think that, so if you're interested in law, I mean, you can read about the Constitution, write essays about the Constitution, and that's totally cool. But, you could also do some kind of a mock trial, or you could do something where you take an issue before the Supreme Court right now, and you divide up and you argue each side of it in class. And so it's those kinds of things. I just think, I'm a big believer in just small wins and small experiments. And so the more you have schools like yours that are taking these small steps, doing these small wins, the better it's going to be. But it's not, this kind of change isn't going to happen from one person at the top, the Secretary of Education, waving a magic wand and saying everything's going to change. It's going to happen from teachers like yours and students like you guys who are willing to do things a little bit differently in their own world.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lucy. And my question is, in response to your book on Drive, do you believe the way schools teach their students is killing creativity?
What do you think?
In some ways, I think they are, because they put such an emphasis on grades and college and getting into college and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think it has the, I'm of two minds here, Lucy. I think that, yeah, it is doing something to quash creativity. I think that, on the other hand, though, creativity, especially among young people, is something that's pretty hard to eradicate. And so I think the bigger problem is that, not that it's crushing it, but that it's not allowing it to bloom. And so what happens is it blooms in other places, or it blooms at other points in people's lives. I think that's the bigger issue. And on grades, there's nothing wrong with grades per se. The problem is that grades should be information on how you're doing. The only way to get better at anything is to get information and feedback on how you're doing. So if you want to learn how to be a better writer, you need someone who knows about writing to look at an essay of yours and say, this is good, this is good, this is not so good, this can be better, this is pretty good, this needs to be changed. And that's how you learn. You're getting information, feedback on how you're doing. It's true for writing an essay. It's true for playing the violin. It's true for throwing a curveball in baseball. And so you need that information and feedback. And so when grades are information on how you're doing, information that you can use to get better at something, they're awesome. What happens, I think, too often is that grades become the point of the exercise itself. It's why you do your work. It's why you show up to class. And there's a lot of evidence showing that when you take that approach, you don't learn as much. And so, I mean, in psychology, in social psychology, there's a difference between what are called learning goals and performance goals. Okay, learning goals and performance goals. Learning goals is, my goal is to master the material. Performance goals are, my goal is to get a certain level of performance on the particular metric. Make sense? So learning goal is, and what we think is that if people accomplish the performance goals, then they'll hit the learning goals. And that's just not true. Now, there's some truth, a little bit of truth. If people focus on the learning goals, they often end up hitting the performance goals, but not the reverse way. And I'm a good example of this. What do you take a foreign language?
Yeah, I do.
Which one?
Spanish.
Good move. All right, so I'll give you my example. I took 6 years, six years of French in high school and college. 6 years of French. Guess what grades I got in 6 years of French?
I don't know. A? A?
Straight A's all the way through. Straight A's through 6 years of French. That sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah.
But there's a problem, Lucy. You know what the problem is?
You didn't learn, you don't retain it, any of the information?
I can't speak French. Because I was focused entirely on the performance goals and not on the learning goals. And so so that's a great example of it. I was focused on getting an A on the test. And so at a certain point in my life, if you needed to know the third person plural subjunctive of aller, I could tell you without batting an eye. But if you were to take me and kidnap me and deposit me in Montreal without any money and ask me to find my way back speaking French, I would be a lost cause. And that's what I'm talking about. And so I think that grades, you know, performance goals are, they're important in certain realms, but what happens is that they have a tendency to just overtake everything else, and they actually end up undermining learning goals in many circumstances.
And my follow-up question is, what do you think we as students can do to change the environment of carrots and sticks in our schools?
I think that you can do a lot of things. I think you can do a lot of small things. Number one is that you can ask your teachers why you're doing something a certain way, and see if they can explain it. I think a lot of times teachers, not your teachers here, but other teachers, other less enlightened teachers, will do things because that's how it's always been done. And it's not as if they're trying to be. It's not as if they're trying to like bully you. It's not as if they're trying to force things down. It's just that inertia takes over and they do things a certain way. And if you ask teachers, why are we doing it this way? They might actually rethink it. So I think that's one important thing that you can do. The other thing that you can do is it's difficult, I know, but you can really focus on learning goals. And because a lot of times the learning goals produce performance goals. And there you have the best of both worlds. But I think the most important thing is basically to question politely the people in authority and have them explain why they're doing it this way. That's your right as a student, and at some level it's your obligation as a student.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eric, and I was wondering, throughout your book you talk about how through the industrial age and the technological age, there was so much pressure on left brain thinking, and that was the age of the left brain. But why do you think society puts so much pressure on left brain thinking when even in the technological age, it was right brain thinking that originally invented the basis of the technological revolution?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons for it. I mean, one of them is that I think one reason is that one positive reason is that it is important. I mean, these SAT spreadsheet skills are important. If you guys don't master those kinds of skills, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So if you go in there and say, oh, I'm very empathic and I'm a great design thinker, but I'm not literate and I'm not numerate, you're not going to make it, period. So I think one reason is that they're legitimately important. But the other reason, I think another reason, which is a little bit more perverse, is that they're that at one point I think they were both necessary and sufficient. So it was fine. And so, again, going back to what I was talking about with Lucy, if people do something one way today, they're more likely to, if I'm doing something a certain way today, the odds are very good I'm going to do it the same way tomorrow. And so I think that some inertia took over. And the other thing I think is that these kinds of SAT spreadsheet abilities are actually pretty easy to measure. They're pretty easy to measure, and they're pretty inexpensive to measure. So as a measurement tool, standardized tests, for instance, are really, really, really cheap. Think about having a measurement system for design, story, symphony, empathy, play, and meaning. You would have to do portfolios likely. You would have to do probably like real-life projects, and it would be enormously expensive. And so I think what we do is we measure stuff because we know how to measure it, and because we know how to measure it, we say it's important. And that means it's pretty difficult to erase.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Hi, I'm Nathan, and I'm going to ask, can success be found by using one of the six senses, or is it more often found by combining all of them, or just different aspects? And if so, what is your definition of success?
Oh, wow, you sort of snuck in the huge question at the end. Well, let me punt on that huge question at the end, at least for now, and take the other ones. I think that they're all important. I think that they're all important, not only in success in the conventional sense, but just in the ability, success in the broader sense, which is the ability to navigate the world and make a contribution to it. So I think that they are. I think they're all important, but it's going to vary from person to person. Because some people might be great at design thinking, for instance, and not so great at play. Okay, or someone might be great at story, but not so great at symphony. And it's going to vary from person to person. So I think they're all important. And what people generally find is that one of them they're actually quite good at, and it's quite a powerful expression of who they are. So I would focus on trying to be reasonably good at all of them and really good at a few of them. But that's going to vary from person to person. On the definition of success, I tend to leave that up to the individual. I think the definition of success in many ways is, at the end. You guys are obviously younger than I am, but success is at the end of your life. Did you do something worthwhile? Did you make a contribution? Did you love other people? And did you have people who loved you? And, that's it. So, but that's, but what's your definition of success?
I don't know. I think it's just doing what you want to do, but, succeeding at it, I guess. That doesn't really hold. Because
so doing what you want to do, but being good at it.
Enjoying it. I don't know.
So you, yeah, okay, I think that's fair. I think there's an element of it which is basically a little bit more outer directed too, which is basically, are you doing something that contributes to the world? I don't mean solve the climate crisis, but, are you doing something like raising some kids who themselves lead lives of meaning and purpose? Or, are you doing something that, are you putting a product on the market that makes people happier, or something like that? But I think there's an element of it. I think it's easy to get into thinking that success is merely accomplishment, when instead, to me, it's an accomplishment an achievement, very important, depending on your orientation, very important, but also it has to be achievement or accomplishment in the name of entertaining people, enlightening other people, healing other people, inspiring other people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Grant. And my question for you is, what do you think the biggest takeaway should be from your book?
I leave that to the reader. What do you think the biggest takeaway should be? What's your biggest takeaway from the book?
I guess to focus more on being, not necessarily being right brain, but utilizing the right brain and the left brain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think what's interesting is that let me tell you the way that I read books. Okay. I'll read a book and I might get 1 or 2 ideas from it, and it might be different 1 or 2 ideas than you get from reading the same book. And as a writer, I think that's totally fine. Some people are going to take away different things from it, and that's completely fine. And so I don't really say you must learn this one thing. I say, here's what I think, here's how I see the world, here are some ways that I think, based on my research, that you can navigate your life a little bit better, but ultimately it's up to you. It's up to you which ideas resonate with you, it's up to you which ideas you think are sound, and it's up to you what you ultimately do with it. That's, it's odd, that's out of my hands, and it should be out of my hands.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Dan. It's Mara.
Hey.
How are you? Good.
I didn't see you back there.
Yeah, I was on the side. I stay on the
Okay.
side. So we are going to give you the floor for the last, we have about 9 minutes. And these kids are probably waiting with bated breath. Do you want to see them all? Look, they're all, look at all of them. Woo!
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. We have about 120 kids here that in less than 2 weeks are giving their TED Talk for their final assessment. And they have watched your TED Talks, and they would really love to get some advice from somebody who's done it.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So, and how long are your talks?
They have 5 minutes. So,
Right.
like Pachachka.
Right. And are you guys using visuals too, or is that up to the speaker?
They are required to use them.
Okay, so I'll give a few. I'll give a few things. The most important thing in 5 minutes for all you guys out there is it's going to sound a little bit. Might sound a little bit confusing, but there's a difference between saying something important and saying important things. Okay, let me say that. Okay, there's a difference between saying something important and saying important things. So don't go in there and sort of use that 5 minutes to talk about all the important things that you know. Okay, don't try to cover everything. Say one important thing. Say one important thing that someone will leave the hall and say, wow, I never thought about it that way. Okay, so focus in on that one important thing that you want to do. Don't go in there and try to show your teachers or your classmates how much you know, because what happens there is you end up talking really, 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 really fast and covering a lot of material and hoping that you don't run out of breath. And everyone's saying, when's that person going to take a breath? When's that person going to take a breath? And they stopped even focusing on what you're saying. In 5 minutes, say one important thing. Say one important thing. Don't try to cover everything. Say one important thing. And I think that's the most important thing. Second, there's something to be said for preparation. Okay? So don't go in there and wing it, please. Don't go in there and wing it. Don't go in there and say, I'm really good on my feet. I can really talk my way out of anything. So I don't need to prepare that much. Don't wing it. Prepare. Don't do it for yourself. Do it for the people who are watching. You owe that. How do you like watching people who are unprepared? People who are unprepared who come before you actually means that they're not taking you very seriously. And so I think you got to take your audience seriously and prepare. Now, that said, don't over-prepare, okay? And don't go in there as like a robot, like reciting things. And so prepare, but don't become so robotic that people feel like they're watching a cyborg. The third thing is, and this is maybe it's also really important, which is this. There's not a certain way that you have to do this. There's not a certain way that you have to sound. You can look at those TED Talks and say, I'm going to do it like Joe Schmuck. I'm going to do it like Maria Schmuck. I'm going to do it like this person. You can do that as sort of inspiration, but you don't. The thing is, if you try to sound like someone else, you're going to sound like a poor version of someone else. All right? And so what you do is you're better off sounding like the best version of yourself. So if you have a certain way of saying things, if you have a certain, don't try to use someone else's style or conform to what the way to do things. Just talk like you talk. Say it like yourself. And you'll be amazed about how compelling that is. And it doesn't mean that you have to be super polished. It means that if you say something important and say it like yourself, you're going to be in real, and you prepare, you're going to be in really, really, really good shape. Really, really, really good shape.
Thank you so much. Did you hear him? Yes, good. We are so grateful that you spent this morning with us, and we are so lucky that you commit to us every year. So thank you.
I'm glad to, and especially this year because I know it's been a tough year, but I love doing this. I love doing this all. How many years have we done this now?
6
years. Okay, so happy 6-year anniversary.
Thank you.
And we'll do it. We'll do it again and again. I mean, I'm committed to it every year.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much.
All right.